Okay, we're going to start. Um, Again, thank you everyone for joining us to today's webinar. Today we have, see, it always does that. Okay, so today we have with us Reverend Lynn Casteel Harper. She's going to talk about her new book on Not Vanishing, Hopeful Perspective on Dementia. Just to do a quick overview about PSS, and then I know a lot of you might know about us already, but we are a nonprofit agency that provides services to older New Yorker and their families. So our mission is to strengthen the capacity of New Yorkers and family and community to thrive. We offer a lot of educational training and other program online, such as our webinars. We do have also 10 local senior centers, but of course, at the moment, they're not fully active, but we still try to stay connected with our client by providing online services and programming such as healthy nutrition and educational trainings. So they design to help the other adult to stay healthy, engaged, and connected. So we also have our PSS Circle of Care program where I am the outreach manager there. Oh, again, I don't know if I mentioned my name. Mommy, Papa say. Um, my 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 name is Shayna Jacques. I'm the outreach manager for um for PSS Circle of Care. My mom is right there. Um, sh- so we provide personalized supports for those caring for someone who's frail, chronically ill, or has a memory loss issues. We also have our grandparent family apartment where we have our grandparent family raising grandchildren. We also have our coming of age program where people 50 plus um, we help them to live with passion and purpose. So please, if you have any question, we have the Q&A box. You can all add your question on the Q&A box there. And also, if you want to speak your question, we have the option of raising your hand, and then I can allow everybody to say something or speak the question. I'm just gonna do a quick introduction for our reverend. So Reverend Lynn Casteel Harper, she's the minister of older adult at the Riverside Church. She will speak about her new book today on vanishing, mortality, dementia, and what it means to disappear. So the stigma and fear and negative stereotype often surround dementia, but more life-affirming approaches to this common and complex human condition are possible. She will share also her thought of her experience and insight that led her to write on this new book. Plus, without further ado, Reverend Hopper.
Thank you, Shayna. And are you okay? Good afternoon. I'm grateful for this opportunity that PSS Circle of Care has given me. I'm so grateful that you carved this into your afternoon to have this important discussion together. Maybe for you, like me, dementia is not just any topic of conversation, it has touched your life personally or professionally. Maybe some of you are living with a diagnosis currently. Maybe some of you are caregiving or have been in a caregiving role. Whatever the case, we sense the importance, the urgency to explore this profound and prevalent and complex human experience. We sense there is something particularly challenging about progressive forgetfulness, especially when it impacts our relationships and interactions with others. I always say heart disease impairs circulation and kidney disease impairs our filtration, but brain disease impairs communication. And by distinctly and directly impacting our abilities to relate with ourselves and others, it confronts us with the fact of our humanness and that we are limited even in our most cherished capacities. My journey with dementia began over a decade ago when my family became involved in the day-to-day care of my now deceased grandfather who had Alzheimer's disease. My journey in professional ministry led me to serve 7 years as the chaplain at the Gardens, an assisted living and skilled nursing facility that had a dementia care unit on the fourth floor. I can remember on my first day as the new chaplain being given a tour of all 5 floors. And when we came to the dementia unit, my guide told me I probably wouldn't spend much time here. With 200 residents to my care, I would find other, better, more productive ways to spend my time than with these people who would forget me the moment I left. I received a clear message that day. Consistent with a dementia phobic culture, my presence would not be needed, my absence would not be noticed. And the unspoken corollary was that I would not need these persons' presence in my life or be impacted by their absence. But all of this changed for me as I came to know the residents on the fourth floor, not as Alzheimer's victims lost to their disease, but as complex, dynamic individuals with vital spiritual lives. They had a lifetime of histories and experiences and relationships. They expressed with often exquisite beauty and power that which is essential to our humanity: faith, hope, love, a sense of awe, a desire to know and to be known. I came to know Evelyn, a retired math teacher who was the head of her teachers union. She often treated me like a fellow teacher, asking me, "How are your students today?" I got to know Bernice, who lovingly pointed out my gray hairs, commenting, "See, you're aging too, just like us." I met Joseph, a jazz drummer, and Gloria, an animal rights activist, and Polly and Victoria and Tony, and the list goes on. I have since left the Gardens and now serve as the minister of older adults at the Riverside Church in New York City. While I'm no longer on the dementia unit, I continue to know and support elders with dementia and their those who love them. I have sensed a dominant narrative that simply has not corresponded with what I've witnessed. A dominant cultural narrative that says that these people are so confused, so sick, so lost, so out of touch, out of their minds, that they really can't be reached in any meaningful way. That for all intents and purposes, they are gone, just empty shells. But I sense that they are alive inside and they are not vanishing. Often it is we, the temporarily able brained, who are vanishing from them. And so I'll begin to share my screen. We'll look at some slides together. And then I hope we can have a conversation. Am I good, Shayna? Okay.
Yes.
All right. So here we are. Um, Not Vanishing, Hopeful Perspectives on Dementia. When I say hopeful perspectives on dementia, I'm not saying dementia is not so bad or that there's not suffering. But I do want us to challenge us to think about the possibilities and the ways we can contribute to a more hope-filled, less fear-driven culture around cognitive loss and change. My primary goal in our time together is to help shift our thinking and feeling about dementia, our attitudes and ideas, moving away from seeing persons as disappearing or vanishing, and toward a more humanizing vision of dementia and of ourselves. The dissonance between what I encountered and what the larger culture seemed to say led me to the page. 6 years ago, upon leaving the nursing home, I began focusing my energies on completing a creative nonfiction book on vanishing, mortality, dementia, and what it disappears, and what it means to disappear, which was released last month with Catapult Books. The book draws on my personal and professional experiences seeking to pull dementia out of the narrow world of disease and diminishment and into a broad space of empathy and common human experience. As a writer and minister, and not a clinician, not a scholar, I come at dementia not by way of disease stages or scientific terminology, but by way of literature, theology, philosophy, and storytelling. For our few minutes together, I will focus on the central word in my book's title, Vanishing, and highlight the ways in which certain language, images, and treatment reflect and contribute to the invisibility, devaluation, and vanishing of persons with dementia. And then we'll spend time talking about the ways we might shift our language, images, and treatment to contribute to the visibility, the full humanity, the not vanishing of persons with dementia toward more hopeful perspectives. So let's dive in. Let's begin with language. We know that the language we use matters. In a sense, it contributes to creating our realities. That's why it matters when people use the right pronouns, use our right names. Popular language used around dementia, however unintentionally, insinuates that people are becoming less human. Disappearance language contributes to stigma, to reducing people from whole people to discounted ones. So I want to offer a few examples. And I know I've used this language and it's just kind of common to our tongue. And so this isn't to shame us, but to invite us to think about and become more mindful about the language we use. Fading, disappearing, gone. When I told a minister friend about my grandfather's move to the nursing home because of his deep dementia, she reflexively responded, "Oh, so he's gone." And it struck me, gone. It seems persons with dementia are often pronounced gone or fading. And yet, while my grandfather's life had changed and in many respects had shrunk, he certainly was not gone to those who knew and loved him. And so other language that is contributes to this culture of vanishing is vacant, empty, blank. We often refer to people's stares as blank when they have dementia, suggesting that there's nothing behind them. The long funeral, which suggests that there's only loss, that that's the only frame around this condition. Another phrase, the death that leaves the body behind, or sometimes we even hear the living death. This evokes zombie imagery, that somehow the body keeps going while the mind has stopped and the person has left. We often hear about dementia producing illnesses like Alzheimer's as stealing or robbing someone of their self or their personhood. Finally, we often hear people with dementia referred to as victims or sufferers, and it suggests that the disease overtakes the person. The person is wholly defined by their condition and by their deficits. I know some of these words are familiar to us, and I just invite us to rethink them, and we will in a moment. Closely tied to our vanishing language are the visual images we often use when depicting dementia. So to our language, let's add vanishing images. We see these a lot. I get a lot of flyers inviting me to great programs on dementia that use these sorts of images. So common images that accompany dementia feature people fading or disappearing, typified here, rather than one disease among others. Particularly Alzheimer's, which is the most common form of dementia, takes on overtones of annihilation. The brain disease evokes the removal of the person in ways other progressive illnesses do not. So when we have images of half gone or faded or ghost-like people, we we begin to see them as uh, minimizing them as people, person as person. We wouldn't see someone with a terminal, say, heart disease depicted as half gone or faded, or liver disease or lung cancer. So, why with this disease would we show the person as being faded away? So, vanishing images, language, all contribute to this atmosphere of vanishing care. It's no surprise that vanishing languages and images are of a piece with diminished care and the low societal and cultural priority given to supporting people with dementia and their care partners. So, when I talk about vanishing care, I just want to talk about a few aspects of that. This is sort of a mouthful, malignant social psychology, but I think it's important to talk about. Tom Kitwood, a British social psychologist in the 1980s and 90s, began going into care homes and carefully watching the people with dementia and how interactions with carers occurred with them. He observed the daily interactions and identified 17 malignant elements that promote the depersonalization of persons with dementia. 17 pervasive behaviors, such as impatience, outpacing, going too fast for the person, invalidation, disruption, ignoring, disparagement. And Kitwood argued that care settings shaped by malignant social psychology actually accelerated people's neurological decline. And he didn't blame malignant social psychology just on individual caregivers who are doing the best they can, but it was sort of it's the cultural air we breathe. So let's talk about social death, which also contributes to vanishing care. Elderly persons with dementia are at risk for what sociologists call social death, a condition in which people are treated for all practical purposes as if they are non existent. Complete social death is perhaps on the extreme end of vanishing care, but what's more common is that persons with dementia and often their caregivers experience a certain social withdrawal from friends, neighbors, colleagues, relatives, and others. A recent UK study that surveyed people with dementia reports that a third of people living with dementia report losing friends post diagnosis, and over a third report being lonely. I can recall visiting a church that had asked me to come speak about spirituality and dementia, and the leader of the congregation's pastoral visitation group told me that while my material would be helpful for the visitors, she would never assign one of them to visit someone with severe dementia. She didn't think it was worth their time. And so we see that on a spectrum of social death and social withdrawal, vanishing care, abuse and neglect. Older persons with dementia are at greater risk of mistreatment than those of the general elderly population. The National Council on Aging reports that nearly half of elders with dementia have suffered some form of abuse. Nearly half. The notion that persons are already gone surely contributes to such high levels of abuse and neglect. And the fourth aspect I'd like to talk about with vanishing care is our policies and our structures, our unsupportive and harmful policies. Just to name a few, the poor pay and protections of care workers, as well as family caregivers, is an incredibly huge issue. Half of nursing assistants in nursing homes have no formal education beyond high school, and nearly 40% rely on some form of public assistance. 15% of these nursing assistants live below the federal poverty line. These are people providing the most hands on care for persons with dementia in aggregate care settings. So, the policies of poor pay and protection contribute to vanishing care, as well as poor pay or poor support of family caregivers. We could also talk about the underregulated or poorly enforced regulations of long term care facilities, where over half of people have a diagnosis of Alzheimer's or another form of dementia. We know devastatingly now that an estimated one-third of coronavirus deaths in the US are linked to nursing homes. So, this underregulation or poorly enforced regulation contributes to this vanishing care. We could talk about other aspects of policy, a severe shortage of US geriatricians, for instance, or the overuse of psychotropic drugs. I could talk about in my own church circles how seminaries don't have policies around teaching or in their curriculum teaching anything about aging or dementia. The list goes on. So, vanishing language, images, and care, when we add that all together, it feeds into a culture of stigma, where someone is reduced in that classic definition of stigma from a whole and usual person to a tainted, discounted person. But what I want to suggest today is that there is a better way. So let's take a look at not vanishing language, images, and care. And a lot of my book takes a look at that too from various angles. But today we'll narrow our scope some. So we talked about this language that contributes to invisibility. Let's talk about not vanishing language. Anytime we use the language of presence, of what remains or is emerging with people living with dementia, we're contributing to a more hopeful, less stigmatizing environment. While there are tragic aspects and loss, there's also possibilities to highlight what remains and what is emerging, to tell those untold stories. When we talk about cognitive change and challenges or trouble thinking, rather than suggesting that the whole person is gone or defective or blank or suffering the long funeral, this language focuses on particular difficulties, rather than something that precludes someone from the human family or makes them a lesser part of the community. We can use language that affirms that experiences of dementia are part of the human experience, albeit difficult one, at times tragic, but it's part of the human experience. And we refer to people living with dementia as opposed to victims or sufferers. We rely on people first language. And finally, how about friend? When we have those relationships characterized by warmth and affection. I can remember going to a reimagined small community of people living with dementia in one place, and my tour guides for this community introduced me to each resident as a friend. So, Dorothy, this is my new friend Lynn. Lynn, meet my friend Dorothy. And it just shifted the whole tone of that community and just a sense of welcome. So let's look at, we have some vanishing images here, but what about not vanishing images? Let's take a look at some of those. First one is a flyer for a memory cafe. A memory cafe is a fun, social, stigma-free event for persons living with dementia and their care partners. And I notice how the images here show engagement with life and relationships. We notice with the vanishing images on the left, the people are all alone. But the image here on this Memory Cafe flyer is people in relationships, people together. But not all not vanishing images have to be of smiling faces playing guitars. Here's another image. An image I've really come to value from this lovely book called Aging Together by Susan McFadden and John McFadden, a psychologist and minister couple. And in the book, they talk about walking the dementia road, traveling the dementia road. A road. A road can be smooth and straight, or it can be windy, treacherous, full of potholes. But it's the idea and the image that dementia is a journey taken with others. So let's take a look at, we have not vanishing language and images. Let's talk about what not vanishing care might look like. Taking the intentional stance. So when we talk about the intentional stance, we, those of us who do not have dementia yet, engage with the intention to understand. We assume the person is trying to communicate something intelligible, important, and meaningful. So when we take the intentional stance, we are emphasizing our readiness to engage, to interpret, to receive messages, rather than the person with dementia as, quote, nonsensical. So we assume responsibility for trying to understand. And that's what taking the intentional stance. We're intentional about receiving messages. And we also assume the other person has some sort of important meaning or intent behind their attempt at communication or action. Not vanishing care also includes a great deal of imagination and creativity. We attend carefully and imaginatively to what people say and do in the ordinary course of life. I'll tell a story on myself here about a time I didn't use my imagination very well. One day when I was on the dementia unit, I noticed one of the residents, Veronica, was sitting by the elevator and was rather anxious. And she said, I want to go home. I don't want to be here. I want to go home. And so, new as a chaplain, I crouched next to her wheelchair and I said to her, Veronica, this is your home. No, it's not, she yelled. And then she slapped me. Uh, it didn't hurt, but it did startle me. And I don't recommend violence as a way to get your point across, but she really made an impression. Her message was loud and clear. Listen to me, understand me. Instead of trying to imagine her world, I had reflexively and naively tried to steer her back to my reality. Instead of listening to what she was really saying, that this place has never been my home and does not feel like home, I tried to correct her view. So it was not a bad intention on my part, it was a failure of imagination. I had failed to imagine where her world and my world might connect, because I've been homesick before, and being told that New York City is not your home didn't make me feel that much better. So now I think I would have responded differently to Veronica. I hope I would, and ask her to tell me about home. And so we use our imagination, and that helps create a caring culture. We know about music and memory programs that are wildly creative. We know Caring Kind and the city connect to culture programs, memory cafes, so many proliferation of beautiful programs that we can be a part of. So, not only individually being creative, but connecting with these creative programs. Also, contributing to Not Vanishing care, engaged communities. As a minister, I'm particularly interested in faith communities, being engaged with people with dementia and their care partners. I think faith communities have tremendous resources. We have space. We are supposed to have an ethic of caring for people beyond their ability to pay or repay us, and to honoring each person as made in God's image, and that can't change. So I encourage those of you connected with faith communities to invite them to be a part of this caring community. Dementia friendly and community initiatives like PSS Circle of Care provides, so vital. Engaged communities, neighborhoods, schools, libraries, hospitals that are equipped and educated. Alan Power wrote this beautiful book called Dementia Beyond Disease, and in it he casts this vision of a dementia inclusive society where our values are shifted, where intergenerational networks are formed, where neighborhoods are redesigned, and where support is given to people in their homes. And finally, we talk about supportive policies, proper wages and protections for care workers, support of family caregivers, proper regulation of aggregate living settings, rethinking nursing homes traditionally, support of community based programs, emphasis on public health initiatives and preventative medicine. The list could go on. And for me, I hope that seminaries will include in their curriculum uh, courses about aging and dementia. So, my hope is that not vanishing language, images, and care will help create a culture of greater compassion and hope. And so, if we have a few moments, we'll begin taking questions. But I thought I'd read just a small section from the book. This was originally going to be somewhat of a reading, and then it switched to a webinar. And if you'll permit me, I'll just share a little bit to highlight some of the beautiful individuals on the dementia unit that I came to know as friends in the gardens. I spent the final hours of my final days at the gardens with the fourth floor spirituality group. A few days before, Mary had helped me plan a party for the group as we sat together outside the nurses' station. It had been one of Mary's middling days. She had accomplished the task of getting out of bed and helping others get to that morning's group activity, but she was too anxious to join in, opting to stay close to the nurses' station. We should have butter cookies, Mary instructed me, with a little decoration on them, some color, a little sparkle. To drink, it would be best to serve lemonade or something sparkling, she told me. The party should be simple and bright. I followed Mary's instructions and served sparkling lemonade and butter cookies in the shape of butterflies sprinkled with pink, purple, and white sugar on napkins with sunflowers on them. In the photo I have of that day, the room is bathed in afternoon light. 8 of us are seated in a semicircle. Anthea is softly smiling, hands resting in her lap. Wide grinning Bernice holds a sunflower napkin filled with cookie crumbs, and Mary, sporting a bright red button-down shirt and a long string of gold beads, is raising her foam cup, toasting to the day. Soon after the party, I filled a small bag with the remaining items from my office, stepped outside into the soft glow of the evening's golden hour, and drove westward home. A few days later, I would move out of state for my husband's new job. But on that final afternoon on the dementia unit, no one was going anywhere. In the photo, I am crouched down beside the women, shoulder to shoulder, holding one is present and happy. So thank you all for listening and being a part, and I welcome any questions or comments.
Thank you again, Reverend. Do you want me to read the question, the one that we received, or do you have it?
Yeah, if you could read it, Shana.
Okay, so there's a statement before the question. So it reads like that. I found your affirmative perspective on dementia patient to be appropriate and right. However, as I read your book, it seemed to be direct both at social action and understanding in professional caregivers, but not actually as a purpose for full-time spouse care, spousal care. I agree with the perspective that they are still here, but the disease is ugly. The behavior ugly and difficult, even though you are absolutely right about your more positive views. There is a much more complex picture here for full-time spousal caregiver. Do you think your work is more for adjusting social attitude and for part-time caregiver?
And that's from Jana.
Yes, it's from Jonna McKin.
Yes, thank you, Jana, for that and for your support. I do think what I had in mind when I wrote this book is that it would be a step out, a layer out from direct caregivers. Although direct caregivers, I think, who are in it day to day now, I hope can take something from it. I do think it is more about shifting our culture and our society and the ways we use language and shape policy and form our communities. So I do imagine readers, primarily perhaps outside of that day to day, and that those of us who aren't in that yet can help shift the culture to make it less stigmatizing and less difficult for those who are. So thank you for that.
Jonah, you can unmute yourself.
Okay, can you
Yes,
hear me?
yes, we can.
Okay. I'm sorry about no pictures. I don't know what I
That's
do about
okay.
that. But yeah, I thank you for your insights, and I appreciate you reading my whole question because I do have a very positive feeling about your work, Lynn. And I think that there is a way that it does connect to the longer term and more day-to-day experience of spousal caregiving, for example, because I think you're marvelously articulate at describing the beauty that you can find in your patient. Um, and I think that's helpful for full-time caregivers to realize that what's in it for them partly is to find the capacity to have this unconditional love. It's a marathon for a day-to-day caregiver, and there's a lot of ugly stuff. So I think it's very inspirational to hear you talk in your creative ways about the vision of this beautiful person who's still there. And I agree that they are still there, even though as a spouse, you're certainly aware that you've lost a lot. But you don't really focus on that. You focus on the person you've got with you. You can't think about what you've lost when you've been dealing with something for 15 years. But I do think that that this beautiful vision that you articulate of seeing the person is still helpful to someone uh, who's dealing with what they know is a hopeless disease. And I do appreciate that. And I guess I'd just like to ask you to think about that more of how it translates to a person who's not just stopping in to see this person for an hour or spend one day a week with them, but they're spending 24/7 with them. And I still believe that your point of view has value. And I guess I'm just asking you to think about that. I'm not looking for an instant answer, because there can't be an instant answer. But I feel like your work has great relevance in the field of speaking to the direct caregiver for your own spouse. There's not a lot of stuff like what you're writing in the stuff that's written for spouses. And I feel very strongly that you have something to add to that conversation. You're taking on a world, you know, any piece of the world you're taking on, like compensation for caregivers, and that alone is, you know, a huge and important issue. So I realize you're dealing with a lot, but I wanted to express my desire to have you think about, you know, what you're bringing to a caregiver who's been taking care of someone for a very long time, day to day to day. I do think you have a message for those people as well, although I don't see it quite so clearly in your book yet. It's there, but I think it's more directed at and that's fine. I mean, you can't cover everything, but so I'm trying to say, beautiful message. I love it. I think it has to be translated a little bit for both the day-to-day caregiver, spousal caregiver, or parental caregiver, as well as for the full-time nurse who's in the memory care unit and who's dealing with these people every day too. I think you have a direct message for those people, because they do go home. You know, they do have time off. So I'm going to stop now because I don't want to.
I really appreciate that that insight. I would certainly note that and realize like my mother would have written a different book.
Yeah.
You know, so but I honor that, and I appreciate that, and we'll certainly work with it. So thank you.
Yeah. I mean, I hope the message is coming across loud and clear that I think you have something to say to people like your mother too. You know, that's what I'm trying to say.
I hear you. I hear you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jonna. We have Angie that wants to say something also. Angie?
Hi, yes. And I think this is appropriate coming off of Jonah's comment. So I'm actually taking care of my mother. She's in the very early stages, but she lives with me now. And just kind of, first of all, again, I just like Jonah, I really appreciate this. I think one of the problems for especially full-time caregivers is a feeling of isolation. And so just, you know, even just participating in something like this and hearing a positive perspective is just powerful and very comforting. So I really appreciate that. And one sort of concrete question I have, and maybe you won't have an answer for it right now, but you could consider it for your next book, which will be directed at us, the full-time caregivers.
Taking notes.
I'm just curious, because you were mentioning, you know, that you mentioned the beautiful story of how you could have been more imaginative with the person who felt like she wasn't at home, and how you could have felt more empathetic towards her. And I think one thing I struggle with is I am trying to be present. I am trying to be empathetic. But I struggle with sort of also feeling a sense of resentment that I don't have, that I'm giving a lot of my emotional and mental space over to this other person. And how do I find the balance of, you know, being present and having that empathy, and then also feeling present in myself and feeling grounded in my own life. And so just, you know, finding that balance of empathy and also personal groundedness. So that was just kind of what came up for me. That's something that I struggle with, and perhaps there's no answer, but it's just something that I'd really love to hear from you on, if not now, then in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Thank you, Angie. I love how you frame that, how to be present with your loved one and present with yourself. And this is a little, I think, Jonna, you know, as I'm coming into these spaces as a chaplain or a pastor or a granddaughter and then getting to leave. So I sort of have these moments where I'm intensely present and then reframe. Whereas I'm hearing from family caregivers, it's constant. And so how do you show empathy for yourself and care for yourself? And I think part of my sense of urgency around this is creating a culture, Angie, where it's not just you, that there are neighborhoods and well-educated a whole system of support, so it doesn't feel as if it all hinges on you. You know, I remember a New York Times article that said the best insurance is having a daughter, and you know that's too much for one person to bear. So I just want to encourage you and to say that I think caregiving is incredibly courageous and creative and intelligent, and you do the best you can. And I hope that you'll continue to celebrate what you are doing and to take care of yourself.
Thank you.
Other questions? Thank you, Barbara. Says thank you for sharing your perspective. Thank you. I'm happy to take any other questions in the chat box or. Thank you, Lisa.
Okay. If anybody else has a question, you can also add it on the Q&A box. Did you see the Q&A? I have like a package just to skim in. Have to run. Okay. Thank you again, Reverend. That was very, very good and very informative information. If anybody has question, they can still direct them to you. Can they do that?
Absolutely. So
Okay.
an email, just I hope everyone can see it there, lharper@trcnyc.org, the Riverside Church, New York City.org. I welcome you to reach out. I really appreciate your wisdom and your perspective and sharing your afternoon with me. Grateful.
Okay, thank you everyone, and thank you again, Reverend. So if anybody has an additional question, yes, you can direct them to Lynn, or you can also, if you have any question regarding PSS, and if you need any information for any type of caregiver services, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. My name again is Shayna Jacques. My email is sjacques@pss.org, and also the same email that you register. If you send a question to it, it will come back to me. So thank you again, all of you, and please stay safe. And I have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you.